Let's talk about non-invasive brain stimulation. It's one of the most promising frontiers we have for treating depression. But, with a growing list of techniques like TMS, TBS, and even focused ultrasound, we're faced with a really critical question. Which ones actually work best? Well, today we are breaking down a landmark study, a network meta-analysis that gives us the clearest picture we've ever had.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with the clinical problem, then dive into the study's really rigorous methodology. After that, we'll get to the good stuff, the core findings on efficacy and tolerability. We'll analyze the most important strategies, put it all into clinical context, and then wrap up with a clear, definitive take-home message. Okay, let's get into it.
So why does this research matter so much? The simple answer is that we desperately need better, more personalized treatments for depressive episodes.
And the scale of this problem, well, it's significant. We're talking about at least a third of patients for whom standard approaches like medication just aren't enough. And that treatment gap is exactly what drives the urgent search for effective alternatives.
This search has really led to a new wave of non-invasive therapies. These techniques are designed to directly modulate the brain circuits involved in depression. They include different kinds of TMS, the much faster data burst stimulation, the more portable TDCs, and even a novel high-precision technique called TFUS.
And with this expanding toolkit, we land on the central question that this massive study set out to answer. Which approach really offers the best balance of being effective and being well tolerated? To find that answer, the researchers conducted an incredibly rigorous analysis. Let's take a look at how they did it, because it's key to understanding why these findings are so robust.
First, just look at the sheer scope of this thing. Following very strict PRISMA guidelines, the team started with more than 10,000 studies. Then, through a really meticulous screening process, they distilled all of that down to the 129 highest-quality, randomized controlled trials. This was a truly comprehensive effort.
And that process gave them data from over 7,600 patients. A number that large is absolutely crucial. It gives the analysis immense statistical power, and that makes the conclusions far more reliable than anything from a single trial.
Okay, so what were they actually measuring? It really boiled down to two primary outcomes. For efficacy, they looked at the clinical response rate, which just means the percentage of patients who saw their symptoms drop by at least 50%. And for tolerability, they looked at the all-cause discontinuation rate. In other words, how many people dropped out of the treatment for any reason at all.
All right, now for the part we've all been waiting for, the core findings. This is where we see the head-to-head comparison of 14 different active treatments against a placebo, or what we call a sham procedure. So, this chart is the heart of the study. On the left, you've got efficacy, and on the right, tolerability. Each line is a different treatment, and the dot shows its odds ratio compared to sham. Now, the key thing to look for is this. If the dot and its entire line are to the right of that center dashed line, the result is statistically significant. So let's break down what this tells us.
The top-line result is just overwhelmingly positive. 10 out of the 14 active strategies were statistically superior to a sham treatment. This confirms that, as a whole, these technologies are genuinely effective. They really work.
But of course, the question is, which ones are the most effective? Well, three strategies clearly stand out from the pack. Transcranial focused ultrasound, or TFUS, had the highest odds of response, more than 7 times greater than a sham procedure. And right behind it are two bilateral stimulation techniques, bilateral RTMS and bilateral TBS, both with really impressive odds ratios over 5.
So what about the other side of the coin? Tolerability. This finding is just as critical. Absolutely none of the active treatments led to significantly more dropouts than the sham procedure, and that's a huge point. These effective treatments are also really well tolerated by patients.
So we have the rankings, but now let's dig a little deeper. What do these findings actually mean? And what's the science behind why some of these treatments perform so well?
The really strong performance of bilateral RTMS and TBS points to the prefrontal asymmetry hypothesis. This theory suggests that depression involves an imbalance, reduced activity in the left prefrontal cortex and heightened activity in the right. So bilateral protocols are designed to correct this directly. They excite the underactive left side while at the same time inhibiting the overactive right side, aiming to rebalance the entire circuit.
So this really sets up a tale of two winners. On one hand, you have TFUS, which shows the highest potential. It has a remarkable odds ratio and this unique ability to target deep brain structures with millimeter-level precision. But on the other hand, you have the bilateral stimulation techniques, which have the strongest evidence base. They're proven to be effective across many large trials, especially for treatment-resistant depression.
But, and this is a really important but,
we have to talk about the TFIS result. While that odds ratio is incredibly impressive, it's derived from very limited data. We're talking about just 2 small trials with a combined total of only 42 patients. So, while TFIS is extremely promising, we have to consider these findings preliminary until they're confirmed by much larger studies.
The analysis also went deeper to see how these treatments perform in specific patient groups in different clinical situations. And this is where the data becomes incredibly useful for real-world application.
For patients with treatment-resistant depression, those who haven't responded to medication, the news here is very good. 7 different strategies were found to be effective. And again, the bilateral protocols, BLR-TMS and BLTBS, are right there near the top. This really confirms their value for this very hard-to-treat population.
This study even gives us guidance on whether to use these treatments alone or with medication. As a standalone monotherapy, bilateral TBS was the clear winner, with a massive odds ratio of nearly 10. But when it was used as an add-on to medication, bilateral RTMS performed best. This is exactly the kind of nuanced data that clinicians need to make better decisions.
Of course, no study is perfect, and we have to be transparent about the limitations here. This analysis excluded certain groups, like adolescents. More than half the trials had an unclear risk of bias. We've already discussed the very limited data for emerging therapies, like TFIS. And finally, there's a lack of long-term follow-up data.
So after reviewing this massive body of evidence, what is the bottom line? What's the main thing that clinicians, patients, and researchers should all take away from this?
The crucial take-home message is this. Based on the totality of the current evidence, bilateral stimulation protocols, specifically bilateral RTMS and bilateral theta burst stimulation, emerge as the most robustly effective and well-tolerated strategies we have for treating both general and treatment-resistant depression.
But this analysis also points firmly toward the future. While bilateral stimulation is the evidence-backed champion of today, the incredible potential of transcranial focused ultrasound is now clearly on the map. And this leaves us with a really critical question. As the research matures, will the future of depression treatment be defined not by a pill, but by the millimeter-level precision of targeted sound waves?